My parents spent a fortune planning a wedding that looked like a royal gala for my sister, gold-trimmed invitations, a vineyard in Napa, $100,000 just for flowers. But when it was my turn to get married, they didn't even show up. Not a text, not a call, nothing. I called them anyway, still hoping for a trace of love. What I got was a sentence that cut deeper than any knife. Enjoy marrying your cleaning staff. We won't be embarrassed with you. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was the sound of something inside me breaking and finally setting free. So I sent them one single photo of my wife, the woman they mocked, standing on stage at a tech conference, her name under the words CEO of Sanivert Labs. A few minutes later, my phone started ringing nonstop. Panic calls, missed calls, messages filled with regret. That's when I realized sometimes the truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs a picture. The wind at Red Rocks comes in clean, dry sheets that taste like dust and sun. Late afternoon light slides across the sandstone like it's brushing off old stories. We strung warm mini lights along the railings, tucked wild front range flowers into mason jars, and let a friend fingerpick a guitar through the sound check. Most of the 70 seats are filled with friends and co-workers who believed in us when it wasn't fashionable. 2 seats in the front row wear my parents' names: Charles Vale, Vivian Vale. Perfect calligraphy on stiff cardstock, perfectly empty. My phone is on silent in my inside pocket, heavier than it should be. I tell myself I've already chosen my family, that I don't need last-minute permission slips from the ones who taught me to measure worth in invitations and headlines. Still, habit is a stubborn animal. 20 minutes before the ceremony, I step behind a speaker stack and call my mother. It rings into nothing. 18 minutes out, I text the family group a photo of the amphitheater filling in and write, "We're starting at 4. If you're nearby, there's still time." 15 minutes before the guitar will switch from scales to the processional, my phone buzzes. My mother's text carries the metallic chill of a hospital tray. "Enjoy marrying your cleaning staff. We won't be embarrassed with you." For half a breath, I freeze. Then something old in me exhales a long, tired surrender I didn't know I was still carrying. I stop bargaining with ghosts. Calm arrives, simple as flipping a switch. I open my camera roll and find one image: Alara last Monday beneath a city banner, hair pulled back, sleeves rolled, pointing to a slide that reads Sanivert Labs, Public Health Pilot, Denver Innovation Grant. No bragging, no spin, just the truth doing its quiet work. I send it with 3 words: photo from last week. The phone erupts almost immediately, the screen blooming with calls from my mother, then my father. I switch to vibrate and slide the rectangle of glass back into my jacket. When I step out, the guitar throws a gentle chord into the air and the crowd hushes. I look at those 2 front row cards and admit what they take from me, a boyhood ache that thought one more accomplishment might finally be the right key. Then I look at Alara, who is laughing with my best friend by the arch, and what they cannot take the life I am choosing in daylight. I tell her because I promised myself I would never protect her with silence. They're not coming. They sent something ugly. She studies my face like a clinician reading a chart and nods once, then let's write our own chart. I laugh because she is the exact kind of person my parents could have celebrated if they had cared to see past the label. The purpose today isn't to rehabilitate anyone's brand, it's to keep our vows clean of performance. If my parents arrive raging and grand about saving face, I will shake their hands like they're guests who came late and keep the ceremony intact. If they don't, I will stitch the small tear inside me with kindness and keep walking forward. Uncle Mason catches my eye from the second row, gives me the smallest, most unruly grin, his version of a standing ovation. Years ago he told me, "You don't need permission to live in your truth." The line lands differently when you're about to say "I do," under a sky big enough to make shame look like a cheap trick. Over by the aisle, I notice a cluster of hotel industry acquaintances, the Preston Alden crowd in curated suits, their smiles polished like glass. The surface gleams, the foundation creaks. I pocket that thought without knowing how soon I'll need it. Near the arch, a spare microphone waits on a stand, our last-minute ad in case a necessary confession insists on air. Another kind of foreshadowing, maybe. The guitarist nods, the light warms, the air holds still, listening. I take my place and decide finally that the empty chairs are not proof of my failure. They are proof that the room for my life was always here waiting for me to sit in it. If Red Rocks is rock and wind, and the honest scratch of guitar strings Greenwood Hills is glass and hush, and the soft thud of money landing where it always does. The Vail House sits inside Denver Country Club like a museum that hasn't decided whether people are welcome. A wall of framed deals watches over a living room that never smells like food, only like espresso metal and stone polish. Ria's trophies debate cotillion charity galas stand like a gold picket fence along the mantel. My transcripts live in a kitchen drawer beside the warranties and spare keys. When we were kids, birthdays could have been exhibit labels. At 12, Ria got a string quartet and sparkling cider flutes that caught chandelier light. I got an email from my father headed "Proud of your diligence." At 18, when I accepted a scholarship in Boulder to study behavioral econ, my father squinted like I had misread the assignment. Useful if it raises asset value, he said, a conclusion masquerading as advice. In my 20s, each time I came home from the fund, my mother's first question was never how I was sleeping, or whether the work felt like it mattered. It was, "Who did you meet?" The translation was, "Clear proximity is esteem. The person is the collateral." I wore that language until it wore me. Somewhere between 28 and 31, I started seeing Dr. Lena Avery and learned the difference between feedback and ownership. Their praise and their dismissals aren't your vital signs, she told me once, tapping the paper on her clipboard. This is. The first scene that taught me how hard the old script would fight to stay was a proper dinner at Greenwood. The table was the kind of lacquer that reflects your face back at you if you lean too close. My father asked about the fund's quarterly gross like calling a play from the sideline. When I explained an impact model I'd been developing returns in the black outcomes that didn't set neighborhoods on fire, both of my parents let their eyes slide to a painting over my shoulder. I kept talking long enough to hear myself, then stopped. You can't sell water to people who aren't thirsty. The second scene arrived years earlier but hangs brighter in memory now. Ria at 16, a planner at the kitchen island with a wedding vendor already charting venues, color palettes, a guest list that read like a donor wall. My parents floated above the conversation as if the future were another house they could buy and stage. Somewhere in that calendar, I understood that my wedding, if I ever earned one, had a budget line for embarrassment. The night I brought Alara to the house later, the architecture did what it was built to do, separate. Her dress was simple black, the kind of fabric that doesn't apologize for doing its job. My mother introduced her as if reading a caption, "Daxton's girlfriend. She works in hygiene." When the questions started, they came dipped in sugar and set down like knives. Do you find cleaning fulfilling? How many hours a week do you mop? Alara smiled the way you smile at a child who assumes the moon is made of literal cheese. More hours than most people spend cleaning their reputations, she said, not unkind. We left before dessert. In the driveway, a shadow moved by the kitchen door. The housekeeper slipped me a sealed envelope with my mother's tight script on the front. She asked me to give you this, she said, eyes soft with something I can only call complicity. In my car, I opened it to a check for $50,000 and a note. Don't let feelings ruin your future. Money as eraser, as disinfectant, as if love were a stain you dab at until it fades to acceptable. I didn't tell Alara. Not because I was protecting my family, because I was protecting the part of me that still wanted them to choose me for reasons you can't fit on a memo line. In the same week, Ria called with a bargain that wore a silk mask. If you end it, Dad will revisit your impact proposal. Capital for obedience. A soft deal, she called it, as if language could make the math gentler. I said as little as possible and hit record before she hung up, not to trap her, but to hold myself to the sound of what I was refusing. Late that night, I went looking for a file I'd once seen in my father's office, a crisis comms draft they kept for anniversaries gone wrong and markets misbehaving. It wasn't hard to find. In the family reputation folder beneath a logistics plan for Ria's Napa rehearsal dinner sat a one-page statement. If Daxton pursues a mismatch marriage, the family asks for privacy as he refocuses on his career. A press release for a life I hadn't even lived yet. There it was in 12-point Times New Roman contingency plans to cancel me with concern. I put the paper back exactly as I found it and shut the drawer. The house hummed around me, climate-controlled and serene, a body that didn't know it was sick. Outside the country club, pines cut neat triangles out of the night. I thought about how for years I called my quiet maturity my compliance gratitude. I thought about the vows Alara and I had written on plain printer paper bullet points about showing up and telling the truth. I thought about the 2 front-row place cards waiting to be either filled or not. The day after I discovered the statement, I emailed a vendor to cancel the fancy cufflinks I'd almost bought to pass for the person my parents wanted to recognize. I kept the simple pair I'd chosen months ago, the ones that don't catch light so much as hold it. When you stop performing, even your jewelry breathes easier. On the morning of the wedding, I slipped those cufflinks on and packed my phone charger and a small courage I couldn't yet name. At Red Rocks, the wind kept its promise, and the sky did too. When my mother's text arrived and the old ache rose up, it met steel instead of sponge. I sent the photo because the truth deserves daylight. I silenced the calls because a boundary isn't a punishment. It's a path. And when Alara asked with her eyes whether I was still in, I could say yes without bargaining. The Greenwood glass would always prefer a spotless reflection to a complicated human. But out here, the rock doesn't ask you to earn your place. It just holds. The first time I saw her, she was pushing a stainless steel cart down the corridor of Sanford Research Center, the wheels humming softly over the waxed floor. The air smelled sharp antiseptic, heavy with chlorine and static. Neon light washed the hallway green, reflecting off glass panels where the words "Biohazard, Authorized Personnel" only glowed faintly. She wore a disposable lab coat over scrub's hair tucked neatly under a surgical cap, goggles hanging loose around her neck. Her name tag read, Alara Quinn, Infection Control. I assumed she was part of the cleaning crew. She was wiping down a stainless workstation when she looked up and caught me watching. Her tone was dry, almost amused. "If you're waiting for the elevator, it's out of service." I muttered something polite, embarrassed that I'd been staring. "You can go around," she added, eyes steady. "But if you're curious, this is the dirtiest clean room in Colorado." It took me a moment to catch the joke. I thought clean rooms were supposed to be clean. "They are," she said, smiling faintly. "But sanitation isn't the same as safety. People always forget that. You can polish a surface and still leave behind what kills." That was the first lesson she gave me before I even knew who she was. Later that week at the City Hall subcommittee meeting on public health startups, someone from the mayor's office mentioned a research group piloting a micro-sanitization model for downtown Denver. Sanivert Labs, they said. Founded by Dr. Alara Quinn. I froze, recalling the woman in the hallway with the mop handle propped against the wall. After the meeting, I looked her up. MIT, Johns Hopkins, founder and chief scientist. The woman scrubbing counters wasn't the cleaning staff. She was the one writing the safety protocols that dictated how every surface was cleaned. When I finally met her again, it was by accident. I was in the Rhino Art District waiting for a colleague at a cafe that smelled like burnt espresso and acrylic paint. She was in line ahead of me, still in scrub's hair damp from the rain. "The economist," she said when she saw me, as if my face were an equation she'd already solved. We ended up sharing a table near a brick wall covered in half-torn posters from old exhibits. The steam from her cup fogged the window between us and the street. We talked for hours. She told me about her project, how urban hygiene wasn't cosmetic but foundational, how the hidden cost of a dirty city wasn't just ugliness but medical debt-reduced lifespan, the exhaustion of invisible workers who cleaned what others refused to see. At one point, she borrowed a napkin and wrote in black ink, her handwriting compact and sure, "Clean isn't cosmetic, it's infrastructure." Then she looked up and said, "When people treat labor like it's disposable, they forget they're walking on the hands that hold their world up." I didn't have an answer, only the growing shame of how easily I'd placed her in a box the first time we met. We started seeing each other often, sometimes at conferences, sometimes over takeout at her lab after hours. I learned the sound of HEPA filters turning over air every 7 seconds and the rhythm of her concentration when she worked. There was a steadiness in her, the opposite of the performative polish I'd grown up around. When I mentioned that I was working with the city on an impact investment fund, she smiled but stayed careful. Impact is a good word, she said, as long as you're not just measuring it in profit margins. Eventually, I invited her to speak at a panel at City Hall, but she declined. Ideas should stand on their own, she said. If they need my face to make them credible, they're not ready. By the time I realized how much she'd changed the way I saw the world, I wanted her to meet my parents. But she surprised me again. Don't tell them what I do, she said. Let's see if they can respect someone without the resume. It was a bold request and a dangerous one. But I agreed, because deep down I wanted to believe my family was capable of decency without a credential attached. The night before we were supposed to have dinner at the Vale House, my sister Ria called. Her voice was low and measured the way she spoke when she was about to deliver a transaction disguised as love. Daxton, she said, Dad's willing to revisit your investment proposal. Full funding, no strings if you end this thing with her. I almost laughed. He's using venture capital to break up a relationship. Not break up, she corrected. Redirect. You're too smart to waste your life on a janitor. There it was again, the language of hierarchy, the shorthand of contempt. I ended the call, quietly hit record halfway through, and saved the file. Not as blackmail, not as proof to anyone else, just as a reminder to myself of what surrender used to sound like. That night I sat by the window, Denver lights flickering below, and listened to the faint hum of traffic. The city, imperfect and unclean, pulsed with a kind of honesty my childhood home had never known. I decided that whatever came next, I'd rather be poor in integrity than rich in shame. Snow fell in slow, heavy flakes the night Ilara first walked into my parents' world. The Vale estate glowed behind iron gates, glass walls, reflecting chandeliers like an exhibit of itself. The air inside was warm but sharp with perfume and politics. A 12-seat table stretched across the dining room under an Italian crystal chandelier. Every setting was identical, except one, the chair at the far end where Ilara's name card sat alone opposite the housekeeper's station. We arrived 10 minutes late. The roads were slick, and my father's assistant had already texted twice asking for an ETA. When we entered, my mother greeted us with a smile that never reached her eyes. This must be Ilara, she said sweetly. Daxton tells us you work in sanitation. Before I could answer, Ria's voice slid in smooth as glass. Public service, she said, lips curved. How meaningful. For a moment, even the silverware stopped chiming. Ilara thanked them politely and took her seat at the far end of the table, hands folded over the linen napkin. The meal began. Veal asparagus wine poured from bottles older than my first degree. The questions came dressed as curiosity, but landed like small cuts. Do you find your work fulfilling? My father asked. I imagine it's physically demanding. My mother followed with, do you ever wish you'd chosen something more, how shall I say, social? Ilara looked up, eyes calm. I clean more than most people in this room, she said evenly, but the difference is, I clean pathogens, not reputations. Silence stretched. Ria's fork paused mid-air. My father coughed into his napkin. I wanted to reach across the table, but she didn't need rescuing. She was fluent in dignity. After dessert, I excused myself to make sure our car was on its way. In the kitchen hallway, I heard my mother's voice through the door. We can't let this get out, she whispered. Tell the PR team to prepare a statement in case someone posts photos. I won't have gossip ruin the brand. My father murmured agreement. My chest tightened. They weren't managing a family. They were managing optics. When I returned, everyone was standing. The evening was ending in a flurry of polite hugs. As we turned to leave, the housekeeper pressed a sealed envelope into my hand. From Mrs. Vale, she whispered. She said it's for you. In the car, I waited until we'd cleared the gate before opening it. Inside was a check for $50,000 and a single line in my mother's handwriting. Don't let emotions ruin your future. I didn't say a word. The snow outside smeared into white lines under the headlights. After a few miles, Ilara spoke softly. You don't have to defend me, she said. I've seen those looks before. They don't bother me anymore. Her calm made the silence heavier. I realized she wasn't angry, she was simply done translating herself for people who refused to listen. I nodded, throat tight. "They'll never understand what they missed tonight," I said. She turned to the window. "They understand perfectly," she replied. "They just measure the wrong things." The rest of the ride was quiet, except for the hum of tires over ice. When we stopped in front of her building, I caught our reflection in the glass door, her posture steady, mine slightly hunched as if I were carrying the echo of that house on my back. Driving away, I glanced in the rearview mirror and watched the Vale mansion shrink behind me, its windows burning against the snow like a ship drifting in the wrong direction. I knew even then that dinner wasn't a social failure. It was the first true separation. Somewhere between the chandelier and the envelope, I stopped being their son who obeyed and became the man who finally chose to leave. The line had been drawn not in anger, but in clarity, and once drawn, it could never be erased. Ria's wedding looked like something out of a luxury magazine. The Alden Hotel in Napa Valley was closed to the public for the weekend, its vineyard lawn converted into a shimmering aisle under glass chandeliers strung between oak trees. 500 guests, 3 news outlets, and a drone crew to capture the bride's every angle. The press release called it the union of 2 legacies of excellence. I was listed not as her brother, but as family financial advisor. When I arrived, a staff member handed me a badge that said the same. It wasn't an oversight. It was branding. At the back of the aisle, I caught my parents mid-photo. My mother's hand rested on my father's arm as they smiled for a local paper, the practiced kind of warmth that never cracked under flashbulbs. Every conversation around them sparkled with introductions and titles. When the Master of Ceremonies announced the Vale and Alden family's symbols of modern achievement, my name didn't surface. I sat in the last row, the clinking of champagne glasses louder than my own breath. Alara arrived halfway through the reception wearing a navy dress that fit her like intention, not display. She'd flown in late after a panel at a public health summit. I watched her walk toward me, and for a second the noise dulled. Then it happened. A hotel security guard intercepted her at the entrance. "Staff access is through the side," he said, blocking her path. She blinked, puzzled. Before I could intervene, Ria appeared all diamonds and charm. "It's okay," she said in front of everyone. "We all make mistakes." Her tone made sure no one thought she meant herself. Laughter flickered around us like static. Alara smiled, thin, polite, and turned away before I could speak. When I found her later outside near the fountain, she was watching the lights ripple on the water. "You don't owe them outrage," she said quietly. "They wouldn't know what to do with it." A week later, I sent out our wedding invitations, simple cream cardstock, 60 names total, printed by a small shop in Rhino. I mailed one to Greenwood Hills. 3 days later, it came back unopened. The envelope had a red stamp, "Address not recognized." The message was deliberate, cruel in its precision. That evening, Uncle Mason called. His voice carried that gravelly humor he used to soften bad news. "Charles is setting up a trust lock," he said. "They think if they freeze your share, you'll come to your senses." I laughed softly. "They've spent their lives asleep, Mason. I'm finally awake." He sighed. "Then keep your paperwork safe and your anger cleaner than theirs. Time has a way of showing who's really solvent." That same week, Alara told me something I didn't see coming. Over dinner, she mentioned that Alden Labs, the biotech branch owned by my brother-in-law's family, had once offered her a partnership grant. I turned it down, she said, stirring her tea. Their environmental data looked edited. I couldn't be part of that. It landed like a quiet explosion. I'd always assumed the world my parents worshipped was built on excellence. But if Alden Labs was manipulating reports, the empire they'd married into wasn't just hollow, it was rotting from the inside. We sat by the Platte River that night, the city glittering on the water. Her hands were cold in mine, the air tasting like iron and coming snow. "If they don't come," I said, "we still get married. And if they do, we still don't kneel." She smiled faintly. "Then we'll redefine family ourselves." Her voice was steady. The wind wasn't. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was standing between 2 worlds. I felt like I'd already chosen one. Autumn painted red rocks in shades of fire and ash. 60 guests, all faces we actually knew, gathered under a clean, wide sky. The air smelled of sandstone and sun-warmed pine. A local guitarist tuned his strings while Alara arranged a small vase of wildflowers near the altar. 2 front-row seats bore my parents' names, untouched, their white cards flickering in the breeze. Minutes before the ceremony, I checked my phone. A new message from my mother appeared on the screen. "Enjoy marrying your cleaning staff. We won't be embarrassed with you." It was a tone I recognized from a lifetime of corrections disguised as advice. I stared at the words until they stopped burning. Then I showed Alara. She read it once, blinked, and smiled with the kind of peace that comes from surviving worse. "They're talking about themselves," she said. "Not me." I nodded, opened my gallery, and found the photo from TEDx Boulder, Alara, in a white blazer, her hair pulled back, her name displayed behind her, Dr. Alara Quinn, CEO, Sanavert Labs, Innovator of the Year. I sent it with a short caption, "Photo, from Monday." Within minutes, my phone began to vibrate. 18 missed calls in 10 minutes. Messages stacked on top of each other. "Why didn't you tell us? Call us right now." "Daxton, this isn't what we thought." I turned the phone off and handed it to Mason, who smiled like he'd been expecting this moment his whole life. "Let them chase the echo," he said. "You have vows to make." The ceremony began. No microphones, no scripted introductions, just wind light and words that felt like home. Alara spoke first, her voice carrying through the amphitheater. "Clean air, clean hands, clean hearts," she read from the note she'd folded into her palm. "That's all any city or marriage really needs." When she finished, a quiet ripple of applause spread through the guests. Then I noticed movement at the edge of the stage. A black SUV had pulled up near the rocks. The driver, wearing a dark suit, stepped out and handed an envelope to Mason. "From Charles Vale," he said. Mason didn't open it. "Not today," he replied. The man hesitated, then turned back without a word. We exchanged rings as the first breeze of dusk swept through. I could feel the weight of absence beside me, but it no longer hurt. The silence of those empty chairs was just proof of who stayed and who didn't. After the ceremony, someone live-streamed part of the vows on social media, a friend from the Denver Chronicle. Within hours, clips were circulating online under headlines like, "The Vale Heir Marries the Woman Who Redefined Clean." Reporters tagged Sanavert Labs and dug up Alara's TEDx photo, which began to spread faster than any statement my parents could draft. By morning, every financial outlet had a version of the story. The cleaning staff behind Colorado's next tech breakthrough. My family's PR team scrambled to issue clarifications, but it was too late. The narrative had already shifted. The same public that once adored the Vale brand now saw something truer, the arrogance of people who mistook class for worth. While the media storm brewed, Alara and I packed our bags. Mason called once more, voice low but certain. "Silence will do more work for you than any rebuttal. Let the truth echo." We left Denver that afternoon for the mountains, the sky turning a deep October blue behind us. The road wound past aspens, losing their gold. My phone buzzed nonstop in the glove compartment, but I didn't reach for it. Alara leaned her head against the window. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "No," I said. "Not anymore." Outside, the clouds stretched thin over the peaks like gauze. For the first time, the world felt quiet in the right way. Not the kind of silence that hides guilt, but the kind that follows when you stop performing. We reached Estes Park by nightfall, checked into a small cabin that smelled of cedar and snowmelt. I built a fire while she unpacked the folded napkin she'd kept since our first coffee together, the one that said, "Clean isn't cosmetic, it's infrastructure." She pinned it to the fridge with a magnet. When Mason's text came through, "Proud of you, kid. Keep the noise off. Let them hear their own echoes." I typed back, not staying quiet to hide, just to let the truth speak louder. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and unhurried, erasing the tire tracks that led to everything I used to call home. The last thing I saw before closing the blinds was our reflection in the window. Two people small against the night, but clean in the ways that finally mattered. They came at 7 sharp coats, immaculate smiles rehearsed. Snow drifted past the window of our 15th floor apartment in Lohi, landing quiet on the glass. The warmth inside couldn't hide the cold between us. My father held a bottle of champagne, my mother a small gift bag heavy with perfume. Alara poured tea instead of wine. My mother started gently. "We misjudge things," she said. "If we had known your wife was a doctor, a CEO. If you had known," I said, "you'd have treated her differently. So respect still depends on the title." My father cut in, voice clipped but smooth. Let's move forward. Vale Realty wants to collaborate with Sanivert on Riverfront. It could repair what's been misread. Alara answered calmly. The project's already awarded. Sanivert signed with the city last week. He frowned. With whom your competitors, I said, sliding a folder across the table. Vale was rejected for violating environmental standards. The report traces to Alden Holdings. The air thickened. My mother's hand trembled over her cup. We didn't know, she whispered. Then start there, I said. Clean the practice before you clean the image. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. We've lived under that pressure all our lives, she murmured. If you don't perform, you're erased. You erased us first, I said. My father's phone rang. His assistant's voice was tinned through the speaker. Alden Holdings, under investigation, Vale Realty mentioned as a partner. He hung up slowly, face drained of polish. No one spoke. Snow pressed harder against the window. Finally he said, We should go. They left the gift and the champagne unopened. Alara touched my shoulder. Does it hurt? It does, I said. But it's the kind of pain that finally feels clean. The door latch clicked. For the first time, silence in that room sounded like peace. 6 months later, Denver thawed. From Sanivert's rooftop office, I watched sunlight climb over buildings once owned by Vale Realty. On a muted TV, headlines scrolled, Rhea Vale divorces, Alden heir. Preston Alden charged with fraud, Vale Realty restructures. My mother called. Her voice was softer, stripped of ceremony. We lost the house. Your father's selling his shares to cover the fines. I'm sorry it hurts, I said, but maybe it's lighter this way. A pause. He's seeing a therapist now. For the first time, that sounded like progress. Rhea visited soon after. No diamonds, just a tote bag. I was wrong, she said. I thought image could replace integrity. Alara smiled. We're starting a community health campaign. You can help. No cameras, no salary, just work. Rhea nodded. That's all I need. 3 months later, my father's letter arrived. He'd issued a public apology and donated his remaining funds to affordable housing built with Sanivert's design standards. Not a statement, an act. When the city launched the Clean City Initiative, my family came quietly. Rhea handed out flyers. My parents sat in the back. Alara spoke last. Clean isn't only about air or water. It's about how we stand beside each other without fear of being stained. My mother wept quietly, my father holding her hand. Afterward, Alara and I announced the Heart Vale Fellowship for students from working-class families pursuing public health. My father signed the first check without asking for his company's name on it. That night, I stood on our balcony watching rain blur Denver's lights, the napkin from our first coffee. Clean isn't cosmetic, it's infrastructure. Was still pinned to the fridge. It meant something different now. Clean wasn't perfection. It was rebuilding what rot had touched. I used to think I needed their approval, I told Alara. Now I just need not to live by their dirt. She smiled. Clean isn't an ending, she said. It's maintenance. Below, the city lights flickered through the mist, messy, alive, forgiven. And for the first time, so were we. When I look back now, I realize this story was never about revenge or proving anyone wrong. It was about learning the quiet kind of strength, the kind that comes when you stop fighting to be seen and start choosing to live clean even when no one's watching. My family didn't change overnight, but maybe that's not the point. Maybe healing just means refusing to pass the same hurt forward. If you've ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told you weren't enough, don't spend your life trying to convince them. Build your own table, invite peace to sit with you, and let truth be the only decoration it needs. If this story spoke to you, drop a still here in the comments, so I know I'm not alone. Tell me where you're watching from. I love knowing how far honesty can travel, and if you believe everyone deserves respect no matter their title, please hit subscribe. Let's keep these stories alive because sometimes telling the truth is how we stay clean.